What's going on, guys? And we are back with Omega level mutants this week. Yes, we are. And in this video, we're going to be focusing on the character of Gambit, Remy LeBeau, the Cajun sensation from the X-Men. Yes, we are. Now, here's the funny thing. There's actually a little bit of controversy surrounding his character and whether or not he should be considered an Omega level mutant. Now, it'll become clear what I mean by that as we get through this video. But what we need to understand first is that Gambit, as he's traditionally written in comics, is not an Omega level mutant, at least not anywhere close. But what we're actually going to see as we get into this is that while Gambit may not be an Omega level mutant now, that the potential exists for him to become one, or at the very least, he was an Omega level mutant at one time. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with Gambit, his mutant powers are pretty straightforward. He's able to take potential energy, meaning all of the energy stored within an object, and convert that energy to kinetic energy, which is basically the energy an object generates due to being in motion, and basically make it explode. Now, one of the other powers, one of the smaller known powers that Gambit has, is the ability to stay relevant outside of the 1990s. Now, most famously, Gambit will utilize his power by using a deck of cards that he'll simply charge using his abilities and then throw the cards to produce a powerful explosion, which is really kind of cool. Now, this is basically the extent of Gambit's powers, aside from some ancillary abilities like increased reflexes, agility, and dexterity as a result of his control over kinetic energy. But while these abilities definitely make Gambit an elite thief and a skilled combatant, it still does not even remotely approach Omega level. And so the question becomes, why are we even talking about him in the first place? Well, as it turns out, the version of Gambit that we are most familiar with is not actually representative of his full capabilities. And the reason for this goes all the way back to an event known as the Mutant Massacre. Now, the Mutant Massacre was a crossover event that saw hundreds of Morlocks, which are basically these things that have physical deformations, and they live underground in the city of New York, but they were all basically massacred by a group called the Marauders, who were under the employ of a villain named Mr. Sinister. One of the other notable events is that the Mutant Massacre actually led to Angel, Warren Worthington, losing his wings and then having them replaced, and then becoming Archangel under the employ of Apocalypse as the Horseman Death. But for those of you guys who are familiar with Gambit, you'll probably realize that the Mutant Massacre came out in 1986, which is 4 years prior to the debut of Gambit in 1990. But all of this ties together, so just bear with me for a second. What we learn years later is that Gambit played a critical role in the Mutant Massacre story, as he was the one who recruited the Marauders to Mr. Sinister's cause. Now, the reason for this was that around this time, Gambit had begun to worry that his powers were growing beyond his control. And so in desperation, he sought out Mr. Sinister as a way to prevent this from happening. And so Mr. Sinister agreed to help Gambit by removing this part of his brain and thereby keeping his powers at a level he could control. But in return, Gambit agreed to assemble the Marauders and lead them into the Morlock tunnels for Mr. Sinister. Now, of course, he ended up bailing out and he was not really actually part of the massacre, but the fact was he was part of the organization side of it. But what this tells us is that for at least part of the time that we've seen Gambit in Marvel Comics, he was not operating at his maximum power level. So that can be a part of the explanation as to why Gambit is not traditionally considered to be part of the upper echelon of mutants in terms of his powers. And so the question becomes this: what happens when Gambit is at his full power level? Well, if not for the restriction on Gambit's powers as a result of his partial lobotomy, would he be powerful enough to be considered Omega level? Well, funny enough, we actually have a possible answer that involves the introduction of a character known as New Sun, which is the variation of Gambit from an alternate universe. Now, what we end up finding out is that this version of Gambit is vastly more powerful than the Gambit from the main Marvel universe, as he represents what Gambit would be if he were to reach the full potential of his powers. For those of you guys who are familiar with the character of Cable, the same guy that we're going to see in Deadpool 2, New Sun is to Gambit what Strife is to Cable. If you're not familiar with Cable, Cable's a telepath and telekinetic. He's pretty powerful. Strife is basically Cable's clone, and he's everything Cable could have been. Strife is stupidly overpowered. It's ridiculous how powerful he is. There was one point, I want to say it was in Messiah War, there was one point where Strife held his own against Apocalypse, Wolverine and X-Force, Deadpool, Archangel, and Cable all at the same time. It was one of the craziest things that I've ever seen. It's the story, like the whole thing itself is mind-blowing. Strife he's such an awesome villain. I really hope we get to see him, but Fox is probably going to screw him up. Now, as for exactly what New Sun's powers are, like Gambit, he has control over kinetic energy. However, New Sun is able to manipulate the energy down to a molecular level. What this means is that where Gambit has to come into physical contact with an object in order to convert its potential energy into kinetic energy, New Sun is able to charge objects from a distance. Furthermore, unlike Gambit, New Sun can use his ability on living things. He can basically cause people and things to explode. He's able to cause objects in motion to stop, or objects objects at rest to begin moving at will. He's also able to turn himself into a wave of pure energy, and while he's in this form, New Sun can travel through space and into other dimensions. And to get a sense of just how powerful New Sun really is, in his universe, he was able to defeat the Dark Phoenix, which of course is one of the most formidable forces to exist in the entire Marvel multiverse. Just think about that for a second. New Sun, an alternate reality version of Gambit with no limit to his power, was able to face off against a multiversal threat. Now, what does this mean for Gambit in the mainline Marvel universe? Well, we do get somewhat of an answer in Gambit's 1999 solo series. During that story, we saw Gambit transported back in time and trapped in Victorian England. While he was there, Gambit sought out Nathaniel Essex, the man who would become Mr. Sinister, and convinces him to restore the portion of his brain that had previously been removed. During this series, we also learned that New Sun inadvertently destroyed everyone on his home Earth in a mishap of his powers during the performance of a ritual. Following this, New Sun would travel to other universes, hoping to prevent this from happening on the other Earths of those universes. And so when he arrived on Earth for the main Marvel universe, New Sun first devised a plan to create a new planet where everyone would be transported, and enlisted the help of Gambit to do so, who he rescued from Antarctica after the X-Men abandoned him there after learning of his involvement in the Mutant Massacre. Now, after realizing that his plan to transport everyone on Earth to a new planet was not going to work, New Sun turned his attention to Gambit and hired several assassins to kill him. Now, all of this culminates in New Sun taking Gambit to his ruined homeworld using the powers of a mutant called Quiet Bill, who could open interdimensional portals. Now, on New Sun's planet, he and Gambit begin to fight, and we end up seeing Gambit's full potential completely realized as he displays powers on par with those possessed by New Sun. In this story, Gambit is able to control kinetic energy at a molecular level, fly, heal himself, charge objects without touching them, and basically do everything New Sun was capable of doing. Now, although New Sun would eventually gain the upper hand on Gambit, Gambit was able to channel all of his energy into New Sun, causing him to basically explode and sending shockwaves throughout the surrounding area. However, this battle would not be the first time that we see Gambit reach the full potential of his powers, but at least up until this point, it's also the last, because Gambit was forced to expend so much of his energy battling New Sun that his power level was returned to its standard level, where it pretty much remained ever since, except for his stint as Apocalypse's Horseman of Death. That was actually a really cool story. That was actually a pretty cool set of events. But with all that in mind, hopefully you can see what I mean when I said that Gambit's status as an Omega level mutant is somewhat controversial. He's not consistently an Omega level mutant. He's never been specifically confirmed as being an Omega level by Marvel, which is to say a Sentinel never scanned him and called him an Omega level threat. No Marvel writers have ever referred to him as Omega level, but the power he's displayed in stories indicates that even if he's not an Omega level mutant right now, he has the potential to be one. I mean, if we think about it for a second, harnessing his full potential, he'd be able to transform himself into pure energy, control energy at a molecular level, and we even saw him defeat an opponent who was able to defeat the Dark Phoenix. And so for those reasons, I think we can pretty easily classify Gambit, at full power anyway, as Omega level, while still realizing that he is most commonly depicted as not even being close to that character. So I'm curious how you guys view this. I'm curious how it is that you guys want to do this. I'll leave it to you guys down in the description. Do you guys want to define Gambit as an Omega level mutant? Because we've never really done a video like this before. We've never really done a video where a character displays Omega level powers, but only for a short stint of time. All the characters that we've covered so far have been depicted as being Omega level. It's because somebody somewhere in the comic or a writer says they are. Storm is a really good example. Storm was never an Omega level mutant until Black Panther issue number 21 or 17 or something like that, when a Sentinel referred to her that way. It's the first and only time that's ever happened, but that's all we need to confirm that Storm is an Omega level mutant. Gambit doesn't have that. No one's ever said it. He's never been identified that way, but this power is universal. This is like a multiversal level of power. So it's insane how capable he is. So leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Should he be Omega level? Should he not be Omega level? And leave a comment. Let me know who you think it is that we should cover next. Preferably, I'd rather it be a DC character. I think we need to kind of switch over to some DC attention with regards to the Beyond Omega level series, or I guess the Omega / Beyond Omega level series. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.